Hello everyone, welcome back to Smith Does Games. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different. Now I watch a lot of films and I love movies and I always have. And so the other day I put up a video which I called Film Talk and I talked about my impressions on Avengers Infinity War. Now I am still planning to do that for major releases or something new that I've seen that I particularly want to talk about. But I watch a lot of films every month. I go to the cinema quite a few times. I watch a lot of films at home, and rather than just annoying all the people in my life with my constant ramblings about the films I've seen, I thought I would put it into a video form. So the way this is going to work is I kind of see this as at the moment I'm thinking a monthly series where I run down all the films I've watched in a given month and give sort of like quick fire reviews on them. So the way I'm going to do this at the moment is I'm planning on doing every film I've seen in a month. But if it's like an older film or something, then I'll probably maybe keep my thoughts on it fairly brief unless I have something in particular I want to say about it. And then I'll give a more detailed review of the film, the kind of new releases I saw at the cinema that month. And so, yeah, let's get into it. This is going to be my monthly rundown for April 2018. The first film I saw in April 2018 was Wes Anderson's Isle of Dogs. Now, this is a film I actually did really like. And there's been a bit of backlash around this film with regards to cultural appropriation and stuff like that. The film's set in Japan. But for my impressions, I thought this film was really good. It's funny, it's whimsical, it is all of those things that Wes Anderson's films are. If you have seen Wes Anderson films and are familiar with them, this is very much in that same category. He's not kind of breaking his own mold particularly. The stop motion's incredible, and the film is absolutely beautiful. Like every frame of this film kind of looks like a beautiful painting. I love the way Wes Anderson shoots his films, the kind of symmetry, the deliberate camera movements, the way each of the frames has kind of so many layers going back in terms of depth. And the voice cast in general was great. Ed Norton and Bryan Cranston, for me, were the particular standouts. And I think it's a film that has the potential for multiple reads on it. I think you could just see this film as a film about dogs. I don't know, that sounds kind of daft, but actually it is a fable. It is just a kind of nice story about a group of dogs, and there's some sort of coming of age elements and there's some character development stuff. I do also think you can see it as a parable for the disenfranchised, and I think that's a read that many people have taken away from it, and I think it holds up under that read. As for the cultural appropriation stuff, now I kind of fall somewhere in the middle on this. A lot of people have complained about this film because of the untranslated Japanese. So the film is set, like I say, in Japan, but none of the Japanese speech has been translated except for in a few specific circumstances in which a translator who's voiced by Frances McDormand is used, or there is at some point a computerized translator that's used. Now, a lot of people have said that in their view, what this does is it puts too much of an emphasis on the Japanese characters as being an other. Now, Wes Anderson has said that the reason he did this in terms of the untranslated Japanese was to make sure that the focus was put solely on the canine story. And we're only kind of given the translations when it's required in order for details of the plot to make sense. And actually, I think this works. It does make the dogs the main focus of the story, and I think it is successful in that. I mean, for me also, I didn't find it to be culturally insensitive because actually, without the subtitles there, when the Japanese characters were speaking, I appreciated much more the kind of nuances of their language. I actually think in a way it was like a celebration of the Japanese language, because I was still able to understand kind of the gist of what they were getting at and the emotions they were feeling and everything, despite not knowing what they were saying, which, if anything, allowed the Japanese language to sing more so than it would if I was just kind of having it go in without really paying attention because I was just reading what was on screen. I also think there's a little bit of a flaw in the thinking of it casting the Japanese characters as other, because I do think that is seeing it purely from a westernized viewpoint, because there are going to be Japanese people that watch this film. Obviously they will have the subtitles for when the dogs speak, but they will understand perfectly what all the Japanese characters are saying, and it won't make them feel other to them. If anything, it may be nice to have a Western release that doesn't have kind of hard subtitles baked into it. So I don't know. I think that's kind of a limited viewpoint. but I can see where it comes from. Now, the thing that did bother me about this film was one particular character who is a foreign exchange student. She's an American girl in a Japanese school. And her story, the story of her character, is that she kind of leads a revolutionary group against the decisions of the government to outlaw the dogs. So that's the premise of the film. The Japanese government outlaw dogs to this trash aisle. And there's a foreign exchange girl in a Japanese school who kind of tries to lead a bit of an uprising. This really did ring a bit insensitive to me because it felt a lot like kind of Western interference, and it did kind of feel a little bit like, oh, you need the Western white girl to come and take control of the situation and show how the Japanese government is doing something that's wrong and that none of the people can see it, or perhaps aren't able to stand up for their beliefs, and they need a white girl to come and help them do it. And that really, I don't know, there was just no need for that. I don't think there was any need for her to be a white character. I don't see why it couldn't have been an uprising led by Japanese students without the use of a foreign exchange student. And then I think beyond that, just in a more general sense, my issue with this film in terms of its Japanese stuff is, why is it even set in Japan? Because what elements of Japanese culture we do see is a very kind of Hollywood westernized version. It doesn't make the fact that it's set in Japan particularly relevant. It just feels more like it's a random backdrop and kind of has now run into these kind of controversial issues. So that is something that I think, I don't know, it just doesn't feel necessary for it to be in Japan. Overall, though, I think it's a decent film, and if you're into Wes Anderson, then definitely go and check it out. If you don't like Wes Anderson, then you're probably not going to like it. It's not much of a departure from his general style. Okay, so moving on, we've got Ready Player One, the new Spielberg film that came out. And this is a very fun film that I like less and less the more I think about it. But I did have a very good time in the cinema. I think the film is visually pleasing, and you've certainly not seen a film that looks like this before. Obviously, if you don't know the premise, it is basically the whole world is kind of set in the future, a bit of a dystopian kind of future in which the whole world basically spends all of their time in this VR game, which is like an entire other world, digital world in which you have avatars and all that sort of stuff. And it's called the Oasis, and the stuff in the Oasis is pretty spectacular in the way that it looks. It is a pretty new and interesting visual tapestry, if you will, in terms of Hollywood cinema. And like the pacing is pretty good, and all the stuff in the Oasis, it is like just like a fun romp through pop culture. But I mean, there's so many things that are so easy to criticize about this film, but what it really boils down to is that it is a popcorn flick, and I had fun when I was in the cinema. Now, I don't think the acting across the board is particularly great. I think the main character just sucks. And so, I mean, Ty Sheridan, who plays the main character, didn't have a whole lot to work with. I don't really like his performance very much, but like I say, it's hard for him to do anything with that character as written, I think. Ben Mendelsohn, Olivia Cooke, and Lena Waithe would be the three standouts for me. I think they're all pretty decent, but again, I don't think anyone's really doing their best work. Luckily, as we'll talk about in a minute, we do get to see this month Olivia Cooke actually getting to exercise her acting chops, which is really nice. But generally, I think the problem with this film is the real world stuff. I think all the stuff in the Oasis is very fun, but the real world stuff feels a little bit underbaked to me, which is a shame because actually the world that it's set in could be very interesting. But the more I think about the film, the more I kind of start to realize that I actually think the story we are given is perhaps the least interesting story we could have in this world. And that is a little bit frustrating. And then when you start to think more about kind of what the film is representing, it does seem like a bit of a defense against the kind of gatekeeping culture that we have around sort of pop culture that is something I really hate. And it does kind of seem like a defense and almost a celebration of that, which I don't really agree with. So, like I say, the more I think about this film, the less I like it. But if you just want to go to the cinema and switch off for a couple of hours and have a fun time, Ready Player One will definitely give you that. Okay, so next is the first of, this is obviously a film that didn't come out this month. It's Catch Me If You Can. Steven Spielberg, Tom Hanks, Leo DiCaprio. And, I won't talk too long about this film because I'm sure most of you have already seen it. Leo's fantastic in this film, and it's an early acting role for Amy Adams. And, I mean, immediately you could tell that Amy Adams was really something special. I think the film's paced brilliantly. And it's just Spielberg doing kind of what Spielberg does, he just delivers you a decent story handled pretty expertly in terms of pacing and everything. The film doesn't do much justice to its female characters, I don't think. But beyond that, it is very well made, and yeah, it's a decent film. I'm sure most of you have seen it already. If you haven't, go and check it out. Okay, moving on, we have A Quiet Place. This is the horror film by John Krasinski, and starring him and his wife Emily Blunt and a couple of kids, and they're basically the only people in it. And this is, to my mind, the best film of 2018 so far. As you can probably see on the list, I went back a few days later and watched it again. There's a lot. I think there's a lot to talk about with this film. I'll try and keep it fairly brief because we've got more to get through. But I think, above anything, I just think this film is incredibly well realised. I think it's a high concept horror film that doesn't feel like a gimmick. It feels like the concept is used as the foundation for a genuinely excellent film. It's very well made. And for somebody who has never made a horror film before, and by his own admission, John Krasinski has never even really been into horror films before making this, and went back and did some research, and over a year or so kind of caught up on all the horror classics. But for someone who's coming from a background in comedy, I think it's incredible. I mean, I do think actually that comedy and horror are in a way kind of two sides of the same coin. It's all about timing and reveals, and a lot of time it's about lack of information in a sense. I do think comedy as a discipline does translate well into horror. I mean, something that we saw last year with Jordan Peele making Get Out, which was possibly my favourite film last year, or certainly one of the best films last year. You can see that good comedians do have an understanding of the fundamentals that go into making good horror, and John Krasinski's proved it here, because this film, like I say, is so well realised. The attention to detail in the world is brilliant. I mean, the thing that, for anyone that doesn't know the concept of this film, there are aliens that have landed on Earth, and they are incredibly sensitive to sound, and so any sound above, really like a whisper, will draw them to you, and then they'll brutally murder you, basically. And so you see, there's a shot in their house when you see that they've painted patches onto the floorboards, and obviously you realise it's because those are the places where you can put your feet without the floorboards creaking. And just little things like that are just kind of laced throughout this whole film. The world is so well put together, and every aspect has been thought through and delivered in a really expertly crafted way. The acting across the board, I think, is fantastic. The two children, Millicent Simmons and Noah Jupe, give really tremendous performances. I think, obviously, child actors are notoriously difficult to get good performance out of, and I think they both really do well here, particularly Millicent Simmons, who I think gives really quite a decent layered performance that is punching above her age, certainly. John Krasinski is excellent, but really the standout is Emily Blunt, I think. I mean, Emily Blunt is, in my mind, one of our finest actresses, and she is just phenomenal here. I mean, almost faultless. There's a sequence in the middle of the movie that kind of proves to be sort of the fulcrum point of the whole film, and it's focused entirely on her, and it's asking a lot of any actor to handle all the things that she's trying to handle in that scene, and she just nails it completely. It's honestly a masterclass, and I mean, worth seeing just for that, really. Something Krasinski does in this film, which I find really quite impressive, is he introduces you to the monsters almost immediately. A lot of the time, I think the most successful horror is when a filmmaker is kind of based when you don't see something. I think that when you don't see something, it's much scarier than whatever you could possibly see, because it allows almost the concept of fear and the fear in your imagination to kind of grow, and that is a much more powerful tool than any physical representation of kind of a monster or something. But Krasinski kind of breaks this rule by showing you the monsters that you're afraid of almost immediately, and yet still manages to retain the kind of tension and fear throughout the whole rest of the film. And I think the reason is because he finds this perfect balance of you're not scared so much of the monsters themselves, but you're scared of the sound that will draw them. You're shown immediately how brutal the monsters are and the consequences of making a sound, and so you understand what's at stake. And so then it's the sound, it's the actual the generation of noise which scares you more than the monsters themselves do. And it's just kind of a subtle difference, but it means that despite having seen the monster, they still don't lose their fear factor, which is a much more difficult thing to do than you may think. And that's a really impressive thing, especially for a first-time horror director. And then beyond that, I think the film obviously is in the genre of horror, but it is primarily a family drama. And I think the truest sense of horror from this film is in the kind of, it is kind of a metaphor for the fear that a parent would have that they can't protect their child. And Krasinski's kind of just made a film that really pulls that thread like in an incredibly evocative way. Yeah, it's just great. I love this film. Go and see it. So next up is The Haunting. This is a 1963 horror film, which I actually watched for a podcast that I do with a friend of mine. So I did like this film a lot. I'm not going to talk about it too much here because we actually have a whole episode of our podcast dedicated to it. So my friend Joel and I have a podcast that we make called The Watch List, and it's not actually live yet, but it will be soon. I'm working on it. If I can pull my finger out and actually get the episodes edited and uploaded, then it will be live soon. So when it does, I will be putting links to it on the channel, but I'm not going to talk about that too much here, like I say, because there is a full episode dedicated to it. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that film, make sure to go and listen to the Watchlist podcast once it's available. So then next up is Quiet Place again, which I just spoken about. And then after that was Thoroughbreds. So this is the debut film from director Corey Finley. And this is quite an interesting film. It is really quite unsettling throughout. The film focuses on two young women, played by Olivia Cooke and Anya Taylor-Joy. And it centers around a murder plot that the two of them kind of draw up. And I mean, first off, the performances from both of the leads are absolutely excellent. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin in a way, these two characters, but the depiction of them is so wildly different. And they're both just really confident performances for young, promising actors. Anton Yelchin is also in this film, and I don't know if this was his last film before he died, but I mean, obviously that's, you know, a real tragedy, and he was a real talent, and you see that in this film. He's terrific, and across the board, really, the acting here is great. It's, like I say, this film is very unsettling. It's this kind of dark story, but the film is almost completely bloodless, and that, coupled with this kind of like sunny suburban backdrop, it really strikes a discord with how kind of dark and unsettling this story is. There is a bit of a hint of it kind of just being like twisted for the sake of being twisted, but the filmmaking on display is so competent that it does have this kind of spell that it casts over you and draws you in and doesn't really let you go until the film ends. And it's really worth seeing. I think Corey Finley is going to be a director to watch. I think there's probably a few reads you could get on this film. I think my initial read was that it felt a lot like a bit of a damnation of kind of the superficiality that we often see displayed in this kind of more suburban lives, in which kind of appearances are everything, and appearances are definitely everything here. I think there was an interesting dynamic between the two leads, in which Amanda, played by Olivia Cooke, is more obviously mentally unstable and in many ways should really be the one who is considered to be kind of psychopathic, but actually in many ways she's more grounded than the people around her. She's definitely more honest than the people around her, and I think there's kind of some interesting parallels between the way she is seen and the way the people who judge her behave. I think there's some interesting parallels there, and then definitely perhaps worth exploring. So yeah, I'd recommend it. I like this film quite a lot, and it's quite different and definitely worth going to see. Okay, so Mission Impossible. This is, you know, the next one I saw at home was Mission Impossible. Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's Mission Impossible. I'm sure most of you have seen it. If you haven't seen it, go and see it. You know, find it on Amazon or something. It's a decent film. It is. I think the Mission Impossible franchise is honestly one of the most consistent franchises out there. I mean, MI2 sucks. Yeah, everybody knows MI2 sucks. But actually, all the most recent ones have been really good. I mean, Ghost Protocol may be the best one. And I'm excited for the sixth one coming out soon. So that's why I watched this one, actually. I plan on watching them all again before the sixth one comes out. The one thing that I was struck by on this rewatch of the first Mission Impossible was how damn convoluted the plot is. I haven't seen this film in ages. And I loved this film as a kid, but I must not have known what was going on at all because I could barely follow it now. But it's good, so go watch it. Okay, so the next new film I watched was First Match. This came out on Netflix this month, or last month. And it follows a young girl in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And it's kind of about her. It's a bit of a coming of age story about her troubles as she goes through high school. She's in foster care, and then her dad, who I believe has been in prison, kind of gets out, and she finds the only way that she can connect with him is by wrestling. He was kind of like a regional champion wrestler when he was young, and she then starts wrestling at the school team, and she finds a way to bond with her father over that. And I mean, this film is pretty standard coming of age fare, but it is actually very successful at doing that. It is well crafted. It is a good example of a coming of age story, and a lot of that comes down to the central performance in the film. Elvira Emanuel plays Monique, who's the lead character, and she's really, I think this is her first leading role. I think she had maybe one small role in Rock of Ages before this, but like this is her first kind of major role, and she handles it really quite admirably. And her and Olivia Newman, who is the director, between them, the portrait they kind of create of this character is one that is certainly not easy. She's kind of a difficult character, and yet she's one that we sympathize with completely. And I like the fact that they allowed her to exist as a real person and with these elements to her. And like, she is a teenage girl who's going through a lot of stuff, and so we don't always agree with the decisions she makes. We can sometimes see the flaws in her decision making, but we always understand why she is making those decisions, and we're always sympathetic with how she feels in the scenarios she's in. And I think that above all is what this film does very well. Like I say, it is a little bit standard in terms of kind of coming of age stories, but honestly I thought it was nice to see a coming of age story about a young black girl kind of struggling with some issues which really for so many people could be very overwhelming. And because of that, as a coming of age story, it almost felt truer in a sense than some of the other stuff you see in this kind of genre. It's really worth watching. It's on Netflix, so if you've got a Netflix subscription, it's right there for you. And it's just nice to see a decent Netflix original film. I think this is probably the best Netflix original film I've seen, and it's nice to see that we can expect some quality from them in the future. Next up is Vicky, Cristina, Barcelona. Obviously, this is another old film, so I'll be quite quick. This is a Woody Allen film. You know, it's set in Barcelona. It's Rebecca Hall, Scarlett Johansson, Penelope Cruz, Javier Bardem. So I mean, like the cast is great. They all deliver really decent performances. They hang out in Barcelona. They talk about art and sex, and there's some kind of fairly unorthodox relationship dynamics explored. It's a Woody Allen film. You know, it's fine. It's not one of his best films. It's not one of his absolute garbage films. It's one of those ones in the middle. So if you kind of like that style, if you like Woody Allen stuff, I would say if you like Woody Allen, but I assume most of you don't, probably shouldn't. But if you like his films and you haven't seen this one, go and give it a go. Okay, after that is The Big Sleep. So this is an old film noir, which I'm sure most of you have heard of in some capacity. This is actually another one I did for the podcast, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here because there is a whole episode, a couple of hours of me and Joel talking about that film. My quick take on this film is that it's a decent film noir, but I don't really know that it deserves to be the kind of talisman of the genre it is. I give more information on my take in the episode of the podcast. My co-host Joel actually really loved this film, and so there is a different opinion there. As you can see on the screen, my rating for it was 3.5 stars. I don't think this is a bad film. I just don't think it is necessarily an all-time classic. And then after that was Infinity War, which, as you may have seen on the channel, I actually made a video for the other day, which was, you know, giving my full impressions. I mean, very quickly, I wasn't a huge fan of the film. I think it feels a bit soulless. It feels a lot more like product than it does filmmaking, and I think it puts the emphasis on too many of the wrong things and doesn't play to the strength of its franchise. But yeah, like I say, there's a whole video I made on that, so more thoughts there. And the final film I watched in April 2018 was Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin from 2013, starring Scarlett Johansson as an extraterrestrial who takes on the form of a woman who trawls around the streets of Scotland, luring men to kind of capture them or something. Now, this is a film which I think is a genuine modern masterpiece. Jonathan Glazer here has adapted this film from a novel of the same name, and I've not read the novel, but from my understanding it is wildly different, yet it still kind of captures the spirit of the book. And he makes no attempt, I mean, really no attempt whatsoever to hold your hand through any part of this film. He's not guiding you through it in the way that a more traditional narrative would. It is art house cinema, and it does kind of have the kind of abstraction that often comes along with that. That abstract nature, I feel, allows the film to achieve much more than it would if it was put into a more traditional narrative structure. And it is a film which I find to be more rewarding each time I watch it. This is only the second time I've seen it, but I know that I will watch it probably many more times. And it is a film which I think will divide people. It's definitely not for everybody. I watched it with my girlfriend. I'd seen it myself, and I wanted to show her. She said it was perhaps her least favourite film that she'd ever seen. It goes to show the kind of wildly different reactions people can have to this film. But I love it, and I do think it reveals itself in different ways. Every time you look at it, you can view it through so many different lenses, and you can get so much out of this film. My first viewing of this film, I felt like it was primarily concerned with humanity and our propensity to deceive each other, but then on the flip side of that, also our willingness to be deceived. This time I watched it, I actually felt more like it was a very deeply empathetic exploration of loneliness and all that loneliness entails. And I dare say if I watch it again, I'll have a different read on it. And I've seen a lot of good takes on this film. I really think it is a film that rewards repeat viewings and study and conversation. And the more you think about it, the more you're going to get out of it. So you might hate this film, but I implore you to go and watch it. Even if you do hate it, it is definitely worth seeing just to see, because you may connect with it the way I do and the way many other people do. So go and give it a go. So that's it, I think, for this month's video. It was a good month, actually. When Avengers Infinity War is the worst film that I see in a month, I think that's okay, because that still had merit. I still found a lot of parts of it quite fun. But yeah, that would probably be my least favourite of the month. My pick of the month would be A Quiet Place. So if you haven't managed to see that film yet, try and find a way. And have you seen any of these films? If you have, let me know what you thought of them down below. Yeah, this is something which I'm thinking I'm going to do monthly at this point. I do watch quite a lot of films though, so if it gets to be too dense, then maybe I'll break it up and do it weekly, or maybe I can just drop any films that weren't released that month or something. It's a bit of a work in progress. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you thought, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks very much. Bye.